back to our study of the roles of identity and the stages of change. We've gone through the first 4 out of 5. And today we're just going to wrap it up, talk about this last stage or role of identity and the stages of change within this one, and that is the integrated stage. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about the integrated stage.
So the integrated stage is different from the other stages, because in the other stages, when you're moving from one to the other, you have that realization that, oh, I am not my parent, I'm not my hero, I am not my peer. And, you know, at the end of your career, when you evaluate and you go through and look back on all those stages, if they're all right, you come to realize, well, I am actually all these things. I am my parent, I am my hero, I'm my peer in my career. And that's what leads to this integrated, all these personalities come together as one then.
Right. So the integrated stage is basically when we finalize our own identity and we say, this is for sure who I am. And once you've done this, there's not going to be a whole lot of change. You've developed about as far as your personality will develop. And for most people, they're never going to reach this stage in this life.
Right.
It's not going to happen. Now, there are some people who do, who are able to get to that point where they feel very confident and they become who they are. It can happen probably as early as about 16 years old. That would be very uncommon. It's uncommon at all.
Yeah.
But so with the integrated stage, we've talked about the career stage, and the end of the career stage you evaluate, right? You evaluate your whole life. If you feel like this is who I am, that moves you into the integrated stage. And the integrated role of identity then, the first stage of this identity is to review. And that's basically kind of a continuation of the evaluation, right? You evaluate in the career stage to determine, am I in the right place? Then you review. Your integrated stage, what you're doing is you're reviewing with very closely. You're reviewing that internal parent, the internal hero, the internal, and you're just looking. That's all the review is. It's just looking closely at yourself, at all of these different roles within your life. And it's really it's like the data gathering. You're gathering the data for future work, right? And once you've got enough data gathered, you move into the next stage, which is
The pruning stage.
yes, pruning. What is pruning?
Well, it's doing away with what is unnecessary or...
Right, it's cutting. You've looked through. You've gathered all this data. You're looking at it now, and you're saying, okay, my internal parent is maybe a little bit rigid in this area, so I'm going to cut that out. My internal hero is really strong in these areas, but a little bit weak here. Right? It's basically you're saying, okay, what am I cutting out, and what am I holding on to?
Right.
And that's what the pruning stage is. You're just trying to cut out the things that you don't feel like need to be there. You've already accepted yourself, right? You said, this is who I am. I feel comfortable. But there are still things that need to be fixed. And so it's basically pruning is the fixing stage, where you're finalizing that personality, you're fixing, you're taking out the parts that are unneeded or unwanted, and you're strengthening those weaker areas, right? And from there,
validation.
yeah, what does that look like in this stage?
What would that look like? I don't know. What would that look like?
So validation in this stage, you're not trying to validate externally.
I was about to ask that. Would you be looking for self-validation?
Right, you're looking for self-validation. You're looking for, as you prune out those unwanted things, you're looking for, maybe I've pruned something out and I feel, do I feel comfortable now
Right.
with who I am? Or do I need to pull that back in, right? So that validation is, was that the right thing to do? If I'm feeling comfortable having removed it, then, okay, good. I feel I validated that that change.
That's interesting that this integrated would be, you're not looking for external validation anymore. Now you can do the validation internally.
Right, right. You're looking for that internal validation now. Am I comfortable with removing this? Am I comfortable with strengthening this? Am I comfortable with, these changes that I'm making? And so each change that you make is a prune, and each time you prune something out, you're looking for internal validation. Do I feel good about myself with this change? Right? Now, if I do feel good about it, then what am I doing?
Next is internalize. You would
Yeah,
internalize
I'm
those changes.
internalizing that change. I'm making it permanent, right? That's basically what that internalizing is. I'm making it a permanent part of me, right? And as I internalize and make that a permanent part of me, now the next thing I'm going to do is going to externalize, right? I'm going to say, okay, who am I now that I've either removed this piece or I've strengthened this piece? Now, how does that change my behavior?
Right.
Right. That externalizing is really that behavior. How does that change how I act towards people? Right. And then, of course, with the externalizing, there is an element of how are people responding to me. And then finally, our last phase is validating that externalization. And that's again, that's an internal validation, not an external one. I'm not looking for other people to accept me, but what I am looking at is when I externalize this behavior, how does that impact the people around me, and is that still who I am?
Yeah.
Is that how I want to be impacting people?
Yeah.
Right. So the first validation in the integrated stage is simply an internal validation. Do I like what this makes me? The second validation, the final one, is do I like the way I am now is impacting the world around me?
Yeah.
So the integrated stage is a stage that is a finalization of who I am. And I'm going to start with that review, looking at myself, finding out, am I, is this, who are all the parts of me, right? And then I'm going to start to prune out the pieces that I don't like, and I'm going to try to validate that within myself. Do I like the person that I am without this? Or I'm going to strengthen this. Do I like the person that I am with this being stronger? Or I'm going to weaken this one, right? And if I feel validated personally, I feel like, okay, I like this. Then I'm going to externalize it. I'm going to start acting on it. And as I act on it and externalize it, I'm going to look and see how that's impacting my environment. And if I like the way that it's impacting my environment, then I'm validating that again. Then I'm like, that's it. This is me.
Yeah.
Right? Is it possible? Here's a question. Is it possible, once you've fully integrated all your roles of identity, is it possible to be shaken and have to go back? Like at the end of the career, we have the evaluation stage, right, of change. That can push us backwards. Can you be pushed backwards if you've fully integrated?
I don't know. What comes to my mind is maybe something huge, like realizing the world is not what you thought it was. Like what's coming to my mind, and not that I'm saying that Saul would have been an integrated person, but Saul going from Saul to Paul because he saw Jesus Christ and because he was taught by him, he had that huge shift because of truth outside of himself. And so I'm wondering if something like that, if someone...
It's an interesting question, because that's an interesting thought. And I wonder, because I also wonder, can you be truly integrated without a true knowledge of God? And that doesn't mean you have to be integrated to be a positive person.
Right.
I think the two ways I see integration as complete would be somebody who has completely and fully embraced Jesus Christ and allowed him to make them who they are, or somebody who knows Jesus Christ perfectly and has fully rejected him
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of wondering if we're talking about here with integration, sons of perdition, and basically saints, people who have really embraced God and all that God is,
Mm-hmm.
and that to be fully and truly integrated. And it's interesting because I used to wonder if, like Mormon in the Book of Mormon, if he was fully integrated. At 16, he was the leader of the army. At 10 years old, he was told he was called to be a prophet.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy was had a lot of his development must have been super fast.
Yeah.
And yet, later on, he tells the people, I'm no longer gonna lead you because you're all too wicked. And his internal hero and parent don't allow that. And even his internal peer is not able to use the flexibility to convince them otherwise, and he stops leading the armies,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then a chapter or two later, he comes back and says,
Right.
I repented.
I'm wondering if maybe, like in the case of the three Nephites or in John,
Mm-hmm.
they had to experience a change in order to be able to stay on the earth
Right. So,
and preach the gospel. So I wonder if,
so there are people who we know are fully integrated.
yeah, so
we know
they,
for sure.
because they're not going to change, they're not going to be tempted.
Right. Anybody who has been translated in that way
Mm-hmm.
are fully integrated. It's interesting. Did they have to be fully integrated before they
or
were
after?
translated?
Right.
Obviously, I think a Mormon, and I do think by the end of Mormon's life he was fully integrated.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's any question in my mind. The question is, I used to think he was integrated much younger, and I tend to think that wasn't the case, and that I was misreading because of things that I read about afterwards that happened later in his life that make me think, oh, he wasn't quite integrated. There was still that struggle between between the parent and the peer, where
Yeah.
the peer was trying to be flexible, but the parent was just too rigid, and he just refused. And was he wrong to refuse? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he wasn't. They were doing wicked things and that they shouldn't have been doing. But obviously later on he feels like, no, I have to go back and help these people,
Right.
as wicked as they are. And so there's clearly a change somewhere in there. And so that I find that really fascinating. I look at some of our prophets and apostles today, and you think, man, they must be integrated, and yet I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them maybe, and some of them maybe not.
Yeah.
And certainly they're all very strong and wonderful men, and are at the very least at the end of their career stage.
Mm-hmm.
And probably all of them have done an evaluation. I can't imagine that you could be called to be a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles without doing an evaluation.
Yeah.
And that kind of forces you into that. Oh, I'm going to evaluate and see here who I am, so I do think they're probably all at least in the integrated stage or role of identity.
Mm-hmm.
But whether they've fully gone through that whole process and are fully integrated, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting thought because
Yeah.
it's a stage that's or role of identity that is so few people ever reach it.
It's almost
that
theoretical.
It's almost theoretical because there are so few people that will reach that. The career stage, sadly, is becoming more theoretical.
Oh.
But it's not. It's a real stage. And I do think there are a good number of people who integrate into the career stage and gain that stability that they're looking for. So in the integrated stage, what is it that we're trying to gain?
Just putting all those facets of your personality together, putting every role that you've been through together into one, so that you don't have to check. You don't have to anymore check with your parent and your hero and your peer and your career.
Right. So
it's all just one.
Exactly. So it's integration. That is what we're trying to achieve, is integration, where we're integrating all the parts of ourselves into one whole truth.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, as we go through this class, remember, this is not a class where there's a whole lot of action, because these are awareness. This is an awareness tool. It's how do I understand who I am? But there are actions that you can take to help you strengthen or weaken different parts of your identity. And there are ways, if you feel like, wow, I never did get that internal hero and I just really struggle, and there are ways for you to strengthen that internal hero even now. It doesn't, like we were talking about in our last class, you can start the career stage at 90 years old if you haven't started it yet. It's okay. These are all things. There are tools that you can use, and we're not going to go into those now. But there are tools that you can use that will take you through and help you strengthen these different areas. And remember also, you may be very advanced emotionally in one of these, but lagging spiritually or socially or intellectually. So sometimes it's not that you're trying to, that your internal hero is entirely weak. Maybe you've got a really strong social internal hero, but your spiritual internal hero is really weak. In fact, that might be a problem.
Yeah.
Right? If you run into something like that. So remember, you're not only looking at the overall role, but you're looking at that role in those 5 different domains, and that they're not always in the same place, in the same stage of development. All right. Is there anything else, Sarah, that we need to
I don't think so.
cover?
I think that covers everything.
Very good. So these are the roles of identity. I'm just going to really quickly take you through those one more time. It's the parent role. The parent role of identity starts when you're first born, and it goes through. It actually just starts when you're first conceived, to be honest, because even when a baby's in the womb, babies recognize parents' voices. We know from research that there's a lot of recognition there. So really, it's from conception to about 5 years old, and you're trying to gain a conscience, a sense of right and wrong, and how to set appropriate boundaries. The second role of identity is the hero role, and that's your childhood role. That's anywhere from about ages 3 to 14 years old. And in that role of identity, you're trying to develop courage to stand up for the internal parent that you've created in those early years of your life. And then the third stage, or the third role of identity, is your peer, and that usually starts somewhere around 11 years old or 11 to 14 years old, and it goes till about 25, 26 years old. And you're really trying to gain flexibility to be able to navigate the world and be a part of the world, even though the world doesn't always maintain the same standards that you and your inner parent has. The fourth role of identity is our career, and that usually starts anywhere from 16 and can go 16 on up. And that one, you're trying to gain stability, kind of stabilize yourself and who you are and how you interact with the world. And then finally, the integrated stage, which is the final stage, stage 5, or role 5. And that can be anywhere from 16 and older. It's so few people actually achieve this level. And what you're trying to gain here is an integration, and integrating all those other roles that you've developed throughout your life. And just a couple of things to remember, that as you move from role of identity to role of identity, so as you move from parent to hero, from hero to peer, from peer to career, there are things that can hold you back, that can keep you from moving on. And the most common one today is social media, that holds you in the peer role of identity and doesn't allow you to move into the career. Also, remember that you can move through a role of identity without ever integrating it, right? Without ever it became internalized. And so you may have a strong internal parent, but not even have an internal hero because you never internalized that internal hero during your childhood for one reason or another. And that goes for any of those roles that you might pass through. And then finally, just remember that those roles, that human development is developing in 5 domains of life. So you're going through each of these roles of identity and the stages of change within the roles of identity that we've talked about. And you're doing it in each of those roles in 5 different domains of life: the physical, the intellectual, the emotional, the social, and the spiritual. And when those are, if those develop at widely different rates, that's an unhealthy human development. We want those to try to develop within a couple of stages of change of each other, or within about 3 or 4 stages of change of each other, and don't let it get too much. Otherwise, it stretches you and it becomes very emotionally and cognitively painful, and that creates a lot of our mental health issues that we see today.